Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Therapist Theater. It's the podcast that takes a look at relationships and mental health through the lens of movies, TV, and pop culture. I'm your host, Josh Treese. I've got a master's degree in marriage and family counseling and therapy, and I'm a practicing therapist here in Music City, USA. I'm on a mission to help people more easily understand mental health and relationships and help break down the stigmas surrounding counseling and therapy. And that's why every week a guest therapist and I talk about a movie and what relationship or mental health issues it highlights. Thanks so much for downloading today's show. Make sure you subscribe so that you don't miss any future episodes. And while you're doing that, help other people find it by giving it a 5-star rating and writing a review for it in the podcast app. In fact, this month in October, we've had a goal of getting to 35-star reviews of the show, and right now we're sitting at 23. So if you like what you're hearing, give us a 5-star rating right now. We really do appreciate it. Today in the theater, my guest is Rebecca Walker. Rebecca is a therapist in Nashville who specializes in working with individuals and couples who are experiencing a personality disorder or the results of trauma. She brought with her 2004's Spanglish. According to IMDb, it's about a beautiful native Mexican woman becoming the housekeeper to an affluent yet troubled family, the Klasky's. The result is a witty and perceptive collision of cultures and values, and a refreshingly honest look at such life-altering commitments as marriage, parenting, and devotion to family. Let's go ahead and jump right in. Dim the lights, raise the curtain, and start the previews. Welcome to the theater. Rebecca.
Hi.
Welcome to the theater.
Thanks for having me.
I am so glad to have you. I like to start out with every guest asking them why therapy. Why do you do what you do?
So I would say that it started with sort of a means to an end. So I moved to Nashville to do music. I'm a singer, and did that for the first half, kind of my 20s into my 30s a little bit.
Where are you from originally?
Originally from Anniston, Alabama.
Oh, cool.
Very small town, and met a guy, and he was doing music up here and was pretty successful, and so he was kind of like the town rock star, and because he was from my hometown. So met him, and then we fell in love and ended up kind of doing music together, and so did that. Sadly, my marriage ended in divorce, and I was kind of freaking out, like, oh, should probably figure out what I'm going to do. I had 2 children. And so I decided, it's funny, I have friends. It's like all my friends are either in the music industry or therapists. And
oh, is there a tie that you can sense between those 2 types of people?
Well, they're both a lot of them are self-employed, private practice or whatever. And so, and I think there's a lot of, or can be a lot of, emotional intelligence with musicians and therapists. And so, I don't know, it just sort of worked out that way. I'm sure if I thought long enough about it, there's a connection. But, so I decided to go back to school. I basically had to finish my undergrad first because I went to the University of Alabama, Roll Tide. For my freshman year, and then moved up here and dropped out of college. So basically I had to finish my undergrad. I took like the maximum amount of CLEP hours you can. And then knew that I wanted to end up at Trevecca, and how I picked that was because at the time I was in therapy with KK Ray, who is kind of a, she's I won't curse, but she's a bad A
You
in
can
this
say
town.
badass, that's fine. I'll let you pick how you want
She
me to leave
is
it.
she's not just a badass, she's a Billy badass. She
Nice. She's on my wish list. I can't recall if I've sent her an invite yet or not, but I'm going to.
Yeah, you should.
Because David Hampton and Nate Larkin recommended her as well.
Oh yeah.
So it's one of the. I have a thing in my life, like in my personal life, where if two people that I know that don't know each other kind of give me the same bit of wisdom, it's like, oh, that's something to pay attention to.
Yes.
So I feel like with the podcast, it's the same, where it's like if more than one guest who don't know each other recommend the same other guest, then clearly that's the way
all
to go.
paths are leading to that. Yeah, she's kind of turned into one of like my Nashville moms, and she's amazing. But she was an MFT, which is for lay people, marriage and family therapists, or mother scratching therapist. No, I like to think it's that too. But yeah, she was a MFT, which is how I chose my path, which is an interesting thing too for therapists, because they don't really tell you the differences between tracks.
They don't. And I asked a million people, like, I was like, this seems important, but you guys are making such a little deal about it. Like, what?
And it's really important which track you choose, because I think it really depends on your personality. But anyway, that's besides the point. But she had an MFT degree, so I was like, okay, I like her. I'll just do whatever she did. So did that, went back to school, finished my undergrad with the adult degree program through Trevecca, and then went straight into their master's program. And so I like to tell people that my graduation from my master's didn't really feel like, I was like, okay, it was the licensure process, because I knew that was coming up. And for those who don't know, we have to get 1 million hours.
Yeah, I'm in the middle of it.
And you have to pay for clinical supervision as well, which is an additional hours that don't even count towards your face-to-face hours. So I really felt like when I got my license that I was like, I'm free. So from the process of starting to finish my undergrad to getting my license was 9 years. Somebody asked me one time, they're like, are you a doctor? I was like, yes. Because I should be.
Yeah. And also, I mean, this is a joke that I've made before, and I have recognized how I actually don't like it as a joke. But like, you get a PhD and you get to be called doctor. You get a master's.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody calls you master. Like, nobody calls you anything.
I will from here on out call you master.
I'm good without that. That's what I'm saying is like, I made that
Master
joke. I was like, no, I don't really like that. That's not really what I...
Yeah, I feel like you have to have like a Star Wars cloak and robe for that name.
I'm down. I mean, we as therapists don't have a uniform. We don't get a white coat or anything.
Right.
So like if that could become,
yes,
I'm down with it.
A hood. I like
Traditionally, I think the tweed jacket with leather patches has been on the elbows has been the thing, but I'm willing to move away from that.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. So all that to say, why therapy? It was a little bit of means to an end, but I had experienced so much incredible therapy up until that point. So I started going in 2000 out of just desperate times, calling for desperate measures, and a lot of life coming at me at once. And I've been to a lot of different therapists in Nashville, and I have gotten something different, like totally impactful and different from each one of those people. Like a quotable quote that I use in my office on the reg. Like, yeah. So I remember my first therapy experience was actually with a clinical, I want to say she's in clinical psychology or something, but her name is Vaughn Sinclair. And Vaughn, if you're listening, thank you.
Also, you have an amazing name, Vaughn. Vaughn Sinclair.
Vaughn Sinclair. She has to write books because of that name. Yeah, she really helped me understand like clinical behavior, and what I mean by that is just like, hey, this isn't normal. this is like kind of in the range of like psychology and like clinical, that's why you feel crazy, basically. And so it helped me go, okay, there's some stuff going on, which will tie in to our movie selection later. And then from there, I just had these incredible experiences. Again, KK was one of those people. I've had a lot of great therapists in town, and Nashville is just, we are blessed here to have so many great therapists.
Yeah, I think somebody said last week that it seemed like, I think they used the term therapist saturated area. And I was like, I don't really know why. I mean, because but also I've only really lived in 3 places my whole life. So
Right.
I don't have a frame of reference.
I can tell you there's not many therapists in Anniston, Alabama. I've checked.
Okay. All right.
For certain family members who have asked. Yeah, there's just not a lot of resources. And so sometimes I feel guilty that there's so much here. But I think there's, at least 2 or 3 great schools here that they're pumping out
That's
great
true.
therapists.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not on the board of Trevecca, but Trevecca does a really great job of preparing their students. And
I loved my time and experience there.
it's just amazing. And the community that comes out of Trevecca is astounding and so supportive. So, yeah, I'm super grateful.
Well, let me ask you this. So you said you had several therapists along the way.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything you can share about, like, why not stick with the same one the whole time?
I know.
You looking for something?
Yeah, if my clients are listening, you have to stay with me the whole time. JK. I think it's a little bit of my personality where I would go for a good probably year, 2 years with one person, and it would usually happen where I would feel like I was at a plateau. So it was nothing that necessarily the therapist had done. I think it was kind of like I'm at a plateau and I feel like I just would love a different perspective on the same issues. And so...
Oh, that's interesting. I feel like my personality that I actually... Which, I mean, if you do Enneagram stuff, like 6, loyalist. So,
Yes.
like, for me, it would be like, oh, no, that would actually feel really off to get a different kind of perspective other than one that I had grown to trust.
Right.
But was that something that was helpful for you to kind of see those different facets of the same issue?
Mm-hmm. I think, like, having different eyes, a different set of eyes on the same problems, to me gave me just new life, and it just helped me get a new set of eyes too. So I'm an Enneagram 9, and that is a huge part of my practice. I use the Enneagram a lot, and it's funny, I've never had a problem being vulnerable about my own story or joining with people. I can join with people pretty easily, including other therapists. So I think it wasn't necessarily scary to me to do that.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So that leads us to... So I guess thinking back, to summarize, it sounds like therapy for you was very helpful, and the gift that you received from it that you wanted to give to others.
Very much so. Also, if I'm honest, again, I'm an Enneagram 9, which is the peacemaker, and the thought of getting to hang out for my job,
yeah, it's pretty great,
sounded amazing. Oh, and I get to make my own schedule. sounded really appealing. So a big part of my story is that I have a son with high functioning autism, and that I have a lot of adult trauma. So when we see clients, a lot of times their trauma is childhood. And I would say, I mean, I got stuff, but I would say that I don't have a ton of big T trauma in my story. And so I would say a lot of like little T trauma, which I think everybody has. But in my adult life, I have a lot of big T trauma. And so there really is not an area that I can't relate to with my clients. I don't say that with any sort of like, oh yeah, look at me, I can talk about these things. It's just the truth. And
well, and also, I mean, what we do isn't based on our personal experiences. So
right.
while, you or I may have the ability to relate to almost anybody, we don't depend on that to do our job. I mean, if we did, that would cut us off from the vast majority of people.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I think going through suffering creates a lot of empathy and allows you to see, you just see the humanity in people. And yeah, suffering is suffering. It just doesn't matter what it is. So I had this child when I was 25 who was born. He was kind of difficult from the beginning, just a hard baby. And then I also had another son who was 3 years older. And yeah, it just rocked my world in a lot of ways. And it was like all my little coping mechanisms that I had developed over time didn't work anymore when you have a kid that throws furniture at you or, is freaking out in the middle of the grocery store and you're dragging him by his feet, and which is always a good look.
My little brother is high functioning autism as well. So I was the older brother of, he's 6.5 years younger than me. So
yeah, you get it. It's a thing. It's tough.
How old is he?
So now he is 18. So he, if I don't like the way the DSM-5, which is our diagnostic manual, I don't like how they categorize autism, because now they just put it under one big umbrella, the ASD, autism spectrum disorder, which I understand, but there's so many nuances with autism. So according to DSM-4, which is the one previous to the one that's out now, he would have pervasive developmental disorder. So he has a lot of developmental delay, kind of struggles with like understanding language and context, and kind of has some issues with everyday, life or whatever. But if you were to see him, you wouldn't necessarily know right off the bat. But if you're talking to him, you'd be like, oh, okay, there's something missing or whatever. So, so all of that, doing school, I was doing all of that and dealing with all that. It was like, okay, I can actually work with people on my timetable. And if I have to leave because the school's calling me, like, I got to be flexible. I got to be able to have a job where I can stay home with him if there's a random snow day or whatever, which would happen all the time, and would just throw him.
Here?
Oh, they will cancel school.
Oh, yeah. Oh, okay.
If
not an actual snow day, but like a Nashville snow.
It's never an actual snow day. It's like they'll cancel school because they saw one cloud on the radar, and the bus that, goes, bus number 60 that goes out to the tail end of Williamson County, Don't even talk to me about that. I would get so infuriated when I get that call, and everybody else is like, "Snow day."
Oh, but they would call you. That's good.
Yeah, they call you at like 5:30 because
Like
if you
when I
ride
was
the
a
bus,
kid, you just had to turn on the TV and watch the ticker that was going across the bottom.
right.
Fingers crossed, hoping.
Yeah,
Especially
yeah,
if you had a test
exactly.
or
Come
something, you know,
on,
yeah.
be a snow day. Yeah, this was 5:30 a.m. wake up call, and you're like, oh, this is gonna be the longest
Yeah.
day ever. So yeah,
I mean,
any kind of change of routine is very hard
yeah.
for him.
Which, I mean, I could nerd out with you on this forever
Mm.
just because, I mean, even though autism is not in my like specialty of practice,
Mhm.
having, and I said a million times before, like my brother is my second favorite human on the planet. Like there's just
Yeah.
there's not anyone who is as good or who loves people more or and he's just got this thing in him that he loves to help. I mean, and it's just incredible. But so even though it's not in my like specialty of practice, it's something that's near and dear to me. So I, read everything I can. And so like after we get done, we'll have to like nerd out and exchange book ideas. And
Yes.
that kind of
Oh my
thing.
gosh.
Because I've got a couple that are and a movie. So.
Oh yeah, I would love to hear about that.
Yeah. And on top of wanting to give away the gift that you received, it sounds like it was a great fit for the life that you wanted to live.
Yeah. Yeah, because at the time, I don't do this quite as much and I wish I did, but at the time I was still doing music. I was doing voiceovers. I was a VeggieTale at one point.
Are you serious?
Yes.
What?
I know.
I had no idea that a
I'll give you an autograph
celebrity
later.
was going to be on the show today.
That's right.
Who were you on the show?
So I was not a recurring character, but I was Hannah Banana on one. So technically not a veggie, but she looked like a gourd. So a little confusing, but
was that part of the plot?
Sorry, her name was not Hannah Banana. It was Vanna Banana. But she was it was kind of like Hannah Montana play on words. And the movie was called The Princess and the Pop Star. Oh. So a little play on the Princess and the Pauper.
I'm so surprised you didn't pick that as your movie for today.
I know. I should have given myself a little plug. I also did some movies where I was either on the soundtrack or I tried out for some movies. So I'm on the Tinkerbell soundtrack and still getting that SAG money from DVD sales. Do you know that people still buy some DVDs here and there?
I believe it.
I get like a $15 check every couple months.
That's cool. Yeah, there's a couple of times where like in prep for a show, I'll check to see if buying a DVD would be cheaper than renting it.
Yeah, totally.
And if it is, like, I would do that.
Yeah. So I had a couple of things like that I was doing, and I wanted to have the flexibility to be able to have all of those things in my life still. So it's proven to be a really great fit for me.
Nice. Yeah, I was talking to somebody the other day, and I think they asked or something about what therapy costs, and I know that when I first graduated and I was first opening up the practice, I had a lot of I think shame in charging like what I charge, and then I started the licensure process. And it's like $365 just to apply.
Yeah.
And then you got to factor in rent of the office and like what you pay for your like electronic health records management system. And like there's just and not to mention the student loans that you got to pay back. So there's just and then once I started budgeting and seeing all that stuff, I was like, oh, now I get it. So like, while I am like meshing with everything you're saying, I also want to let people know it's like, hey, this is not
Oh, yeah.
Like an easy,
Oh, no.
just kind of anybody can walk into it lazily and be like, yeah, cool. Like, I'd love to get a recliner and listen to people. And like, I mean, yeah, that's
Right.
It is, but
Yeah,
it's a
while I
steep
will
road.
say it is an honor to sit there in people's pain and let them share tears and all of that. So I'm a 9. I'm in what's called the body instinctual triad. And so, like, I will see 7 people in a day. And at the end of my day, I'm like, I feel pretty good. And then the next day, I'll wake up and I can't move my neck.
Oh, empathy hangover.
Uh-huh.
Oh, but
And
physically manifesting.
But it comes out in,
hangover.
yeah,
Wow.
it comes out in physical pain. And so if I'm not careful, I can really run myself ragged because my body is like taking on the emotions of all these clients. And while I do feel like you need to, if you are interested in this profession, you do need to check yourself. Like, do I take people's stuff home with me? Like, that's a big part of it. And I really don't. Like, I can. I mean, there are some stories, obviously, that just touch your story and you're just wrecked by it. But there is a sort of ability that you need to have in place of just sort of going, okay, that was that person.
Which is also, I think, a learned ability.
It is.
Because when I started my practicum, I think I've said it on here before, week 1, 0 clients. Week 2, I found out 13 minutes before my first client.
Yes.
Week 3, I had 9 all on the same day. And they were all intakes.
Yes.
Which is like, first session, things have gotten so bad, so out of control, you're coming in. So it's at the apex of the story.
Yes.
And so like that day, I remember Leigh-Ann and I had to go to Centennial Park and just walk for like 2 or 3 hours before I felt like a normal person again.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because it was just so heavy on me.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And if you don't take care of yourself, I mean, compassion fatigue is real. And I really take Fridays as kind of a me day, and I kind of just check the engine, like, okay, what does my engine need today? Does it need oil? Does it need gas? Does it, so some days I'll write, some days I'll go on a hike by myself, some days I'll do a yoga class, massage, whatever, but really try to pour back into myself.
Yeah. And I had to, I ended up learning at this particular site I was doing my practicum at, I would do, I don't know, I guess I would call it business casual, like long sleeve button up, khakis, but I would start taking a changing of clothes. And before I left the building, I would change clothes and then leave. And for me, it was just like a symbolic, I'm taking this role off. I'm going back into my personal kind of thing. And I remember even conceptualizing it with the language of, I'm going to trust that these stories will be okay for the next week being left here.
Yes.
And I'll come back and I'll pick them up again, when I'm back next week. Because I think for me, it was a big thing of telling myself, these aren't your stories.
Yeah.
Like, yes, you care about these people, but you don't have to carry their stories to care about them. So for me, it was just kind of like a symbolic thing, really, because I mean, it wasn't like I had to drive super far and I wasn't comfortable in those clothes. It was just, I need something that's a ritual that helps me kind of move from I'm in this role to now I'm not.
Yes. Love it.
Yeah. So let's talk a movie.
Yes.
What movie did you bring for us to talk about today?
So excited to talk about this. I brought the movie Spanglish.
Starring, I think was 2004.
Yes. Starring Adam Sandler. I think this is one of his only serious roles. So you could have walked by this in Blockbuster, because there were still Blockbusters in 2004. And you might have been like, it's an Adam Sandler movie. I don't know that I'm into that. But I will tell you, it is very different.
Yeah, I think he had another one right before this called Punch Drunk Love.
Yes.
If it wasn't before it was right after.
Yes. Yeah, I don't know enough about Adam Sandler's career to say, but I think Spanglish is one of his only, maybe not, but.
Well, and I would have put this kind of with, and I'm going to totally blank on the name of the movie now, but it was a Judd Apatow movie where it was him and Seth Rogen. I would have put this in that category of like, there's funny, there's drama, and I'm totally not going to be able to find it either. But I was mentioning to you before we started recording Funny People. That was the one. This is a movie that I had seen probably 2 or 3 times before, but I had a very different experience watching it in prep for this show post clinical training than I did the other times watching it. Like, I think the other times watching it, I just thought, this is kind of funny and quirky. Clearly there's like a clash of culture kind of happening. I think that's probably where my appreciation for it stopped.
Yeah.
And then this time watching it, I even said to Leigh-Ann before I left this morning, like, I don't know where this is going to go because there's too much information in this movie. Like, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but like, there's 300 things you could talk about instead of just one.
Yeah. I wrote down at least 5 major themes that you could go from a therapeutic standpoint. I think the one that probably hit me the hardest, because I have a lot of personal connection to it, was sort of the personality disorder aspect of it. And so for those who are not in the therapy world, I learned the diagnostic manual 4. That's how long ago it was when I was in school.
Wasn't there something after it too? It was like 4-E or...
Oh, maybe. I don't know. We learned DSM-4. Now there's a 5, and it was dramatically different from the 4. So I kind of feel a little bit like duped, like I didn't get the full training or whatever.
And then 2022, we're switching to the ICD 11 or something. Is that?
Yeah, I don't keep up with that stuff.
I don't know.
Probably should,
yeah.
but
I know that in school they kept, which I mean, when I say in school, I graduated December of 17, so I'm not like tremendously far out.
Yeah.
But in school, they were talking about, oh yeah, well, the DSM-5, we're not going to be using it, pretty soon. But I always thought they were talking about like later this year they're getting rid of it, and now it's still around. And
yeah,
I just read something the other day about 2022 for the next ICD, which is like the World Health Organization's version.
Okay.
Just to kind of, I don't know what the right word is, but kind of make it a standard across more boards than even a national one.
Okay. Yeah, so the DSM-4 used to have what is different axes. So you had an axis 2. If you were on the axis 2, you were what was called a personality disorder. And there's 7 or 8 personality disorders, I think.
I got the 5 over here on the bookshelf if you want to.
Yeah, we won't. People are already snoring hearing me talk about it. But anyway, personality disorder is kind of like selfishness turned real bad. It's like we all throw around the word, oh, he's a narcissist, she's a narcissist, whatever. But this is like a clinical version of somebody being really, really terrible to be around. And that sounds horrible.
Yeah, and I'll say it's not, I think that there are
difficult to be
personality
around,
disorder labels or diagnoses or what have you that people kind of throw around colloquially. I can never say that word, colloquially.
Yes.
As a slang or something. Like, people will say quite often, oh, they're a narcissist. Oh, man, that's borderline. That you're a bipolar, or like that kind of thing. And I think that kind of language is dangerous.
Yes.
But B, it's not just, well, that person's an a-hole.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's not, even though it's called a personality disorder, it's not just a personality, because a person who's an a-hole, you know, with the right kind of confrontation and the right kind of connection, they can hear that and they can make a change.
Yes.
You know, versus somebody who truly has a diagnosed personality disorder, there's like a neurological thing happening.
Yes.
So it's not just they're mean
Mm-hmm.
or they're uncaring or they're aloof, but
Right.
it's like because of some imbalances that are happening neurologically, you know, their brain functions in a different way.
Yes. This is not something that you can be born with. It is developed over time. So it's almost like defense mechanisms and strategies to keep a person safe, but it's like the defense mechanism gone awry.
Mm-hmm.
And so part of what I do in my practice, because I've had that in my story, it really brings me a lot of joy to work with clients who are in a relationship, potentially a marriage or dating relationship, or even in a parent-child relationship with someone who does have a personality disorder. And I think Taya Leone's character is such a great picture of what that is and what that looks like and how it plays out in family systems.
Yeah. I took a peek a little while ago. Deborah was her
Yes.
character's name.
Deborah
And
Klosky.
and Adam Sandler was John. So traditionally I'll ask like why this movie. I think that's a good maybe peek inside why you picked this movie. So in the case of Deborah, I think it's easy to say, and by the way, I mean, I stopped saying this, but if you haven't seen the movie and you're listening to this, thanks, but also, I don't know, pause, watch the movie, get back with us. But the family definitely circles around Deborah.
Correct.
Deborah is, I guess you could call her a symptom bearer, but it seems like everybody else just kind of works around her.
Yes.
And they know when things are going to be bad and they know when things are going to be off, and they will not say certain things or not do certain things to try to like avoid. I even said to Leigh-Ann this morning, you know, when I was telling her a little bit about the movie, she's like the Joker in The Dark Knight. She's an agent of chaos, only not intentionally.
Yeah.
Like, she's not intentionally setting out to cause this chaos.
Yes.
Because I think in general, there was an episode of Russell Brand's podcast that I listened to a while back, and I've recommended to like everybody I've ever talked to since, with Brene Brown on it, and she talked about this activity or study or something that she did where she was asking this group of people, in general, do you believe that people are doing their best? And, you know, she said some people were like, absolutely. And she's like, my honest answer is no. People are not doing their best, you know. And then she said she asked her husband what he thought, and he's a pediatrician, I think. And she said he's a very thoughtful person. And so he said, hey, that's a really great question. I need time to consider it. And he came back a couple hours later and was like, here's the deal. I don't know. But what I do know is my life works better if I believe they are.
Yes.
And so she was posing this question to this group of people that she was working with. And then she said, now I want you to picture in your mind somebody who really annoys you, really bothers you. And how would your relationship with them change if you believed that they were just doing their best to get by? And then one person was like, oh, I would have to stop being angry and I'd have to be compassionate and understanding. And so, you know, I think that that's like Deborah in the movie. Like, I think she's just doing her best. It's just, I had this thought towards the end where she got into her vehicle and she was trying to drive away and her mom came up to her. I just thought, oh, it's like inside of her, just all this chaos buzzing around, and she can't regulate herself.
Yes. Yeah.
Like she can't bring herself to calm.
Mm-hmm.
And so she's doing her best with that boundless chaos inside.
Yeah. When Flor when Flor is introduced to the family, she walks out and Deborah is telling her what she wants out of her. And she says, I wrote it down, I'm very loose. I'm very loose and meticulous at the same time.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, she really believes that about herself, that she's this go with the flow, great hang.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just not who she is. And she's very childlike. There's a very childlike quality to her.
Yeah. I think especially when you see any kind of conflict happen with her and John.
Right. Mm-hmm.
She really wants him to soothe her, comfort her, pay attention to her.
Yes.
That kind of thing.
Yes.
The meticulous versus loose thing, I kind of thought it reminded me of like times where if we've filled out an assessment or something and you have that inner struggle with, well, do I answer for who I want to be or do I answer who I am?
Yes.
And I got that sense then where it's like, oh, I think she probably wants to be loose, and
Yes.
she may be mistaking a lack of intention in her life with spontaneity.
Yes.
Or the ability to deal with ambiguity for a lack of being able to commit to something and follow through.
Yes. Yeah. I think she is this temper tantrumed child that is in this 35-year-old body or 40-year-old body. And, you know, you see all her family sidestepping and walking on eggshells to be in relationship with her. And it's so painful because they have to lose themselves.
Yeah.
In order to be in relationship with her and to stay in the house. And so a big thing that we as therapists talk about is family systems. And we had a professor at Trevecca, Dr. Leahy, and I'll never forget this image, but she talks about how a baby mobile, if you pull on one side of the baby mobile, the whole thing moves.
Mm-hmm.
And so interestingly enough, the baby mobile of this family, the Kloskis, is moving around, and Flor comes in and it throws it off because Flor has a lot of fire in her. She has a lot of dignity in herself. And I mean, she's human. She has her issues and all that, but she has boundaries. And so she comes in with these boundaries, and with Deborah, she's going, no,
Yeah.
you will not do that. You will not take my daughter away without asking.
And Deborah responds in the typical way when a person kind of lays out a boundary. Deborah immediately tries to test it.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I don't know about tries. I mean, she does. She tests it.
Yeah.
You know.
Sometimes bulldozes.
Oh yeah.
Over
and
the
to
boundary.
her defense, she's used to her family. I don't know if I've ever used this word before, kowtowing to her and just letting her do whatever she wants to do.
Yes. Yeah. Just and how powerful a person with a personality disorder, how much they can change the system, and how really when my clients do come in and they have somebody with a personality disorder in their lives that's just giving them hell, I tell them, you will not change this person, but you can change the interactions. And really the only way to do that is through really strong boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
And
you can't control them, but you can control you.
Exactly.
And how you respond to them.
Yeah. And they can learn. They can learn that, okay, when this person says no, they mean no.
Mm-hmm.
But they are going to try 300 times.
Because they need to know that you mean it.
Yeah.
And there's no other way to know that you mean it other than to
Test
try to
it.
see if you mean it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so we see with her daughter, this oftentimes with personality disorders, all of their children are extensions of them. So the child is not separate. The child is me.
Oh, okay. So I thought when you first started saying that like you were going to say that Bernie had a quality of Deborah's, but you're saying, which is an example of just an enmeshed kind of like, I guess it's codependency on steroids. Like, I'm not okay unless you're okay. That's a good example of what you're.
Yeah, it's like the parent that makes everything about them. Well, you just ride that thought out a little bit further, and so a child cannot be separate from the parent. It's like, well, they can't be their own person. They have to represent me. They have to look a certain way. So in this movie, her child has, is a little bit what some would say is pudgy. I think she's precious.
Yeah, that scene broke my heart.
Oh,
I mean, Bernie is just the sweetest character. And that's a part where like I remembered going in, but then seeing it again, I think I even said out loud, "Oh, sweet girl." But yeah, so you can tell that Deborah is very conscious of her image.
Yep.
And so at some point, she turns up to 11, goes out, grabs a bunch of clothing, and then comes back.
Yeah. Yeah. And she intentionally buys too small clothing for her daughter in order to quote unquote motivate her. And then when John, Adam Sandler's character, is not on the same page, that's a personal affront to her. Like, we have to be on the same page.
Yeah.
This is our daughter's well-being, and she really doesn't know anything about her daughter's well-being. And John, the dad, I would say that's a really healthily, securely attached relationship that John has with his daughter,
With
Bernie.
Yeah.
That's an example of that daughter knows that she can just be who she is with him, warts and all.
And I think it goes the other way too.
Yes.
I think he has a level of comfort with Bernie that he doesn't have with Deborah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, he has to morph and shove down his feelings and walk on eggshells and all that. So yeah, to see Flor. So in the narration of the movie, Cristina, it's my Spanish accent. Cristina, is talking about her mother, of what she observed probably later on as she got older. Her mom tried really hard to not get in the thick of it and not be affected by this family, but the minute she got out her sewing machine and changed the size of the clothing so that Bernie could wear it, she was dug in like a tick.
And I think it's interesting too, because at that point in time, so the narration that kind of transitions the story from scene to scene throughout the movie, it's Christina's application essay to Princeton.
Yes.
And she has to write about her hero or somebody she admires, and she says, "It's my mom. Totally, it's my mom." At that point in the story, Flor knew zero English.
Yes.
Zero. Like, when she came to apply for the job, she brought her cousin Monica with her, and Deborah was even like, "Oh, who is it that's applying?"
Yes.
And so Monica had to translate, between what Deborah was saying and what Flor was saying. So at this point, they're at the house. I don't remember where Flor was, but like the whole thing with the clothes happens, and somehow her and John and Deborah and Bernie are all in the same room, and Fleur doesn't speak English, but she knows what's going on.
Yes.
And so then they all like turn and they walk out, and Fleur goes home and has Christina teach her one sentence.
Yeah.
Because she knew what she was going to do. So she learns the sentence, just try it on.
Yes. It's so cute.
Just try it on.
The way she's saying, she's like, hey,
Yeah.
just try it on.
Yeah. Yeah.
So cute.
And so she gets there, I think, super early in the morning, grabs all the bags of clothes and like alters them to where they do fit her. Because I think Deborah said something like she's in between sizes. And so I got her the size down. And then when she presents them to Bernie, Bernie's like, no, they're too tight. And once again, no English. They're too tight. They don't fit. And Fleur's like, just try it on. And she's like, fine, I'll show you. And she steps into the restroom to change. And as she's kind of talking about how she knows that they're not going to, like, I'm just humoring you. They're too tight, but fine. And then she falls quiet. And when she walks out and they fit, it's just this, I don't know, joy. And she runs up and hugs her. And
well, it's like, you see me.
And Fleur just goes, okay, and walks out like
exactly.
Like it's like, all right,
okay.
I got too close. I can tell this is too close.
Yeah.
But I could not act.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, to see this woman, this mother figure that really sees everything that happened. I think the grandmother sees Bernie, but the grandmother is also kind of in her own triangle with Deborah, that it makes it hard. The grandmother's not going to sacrifice her relationship with her daughter for Bernie. Like she will try to push up against Deborah, but she knows she's a little bit powerless. And
I think grandma is hip to what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, and it could just be where she's at in life. I don't know.
Right.
But I think for her, because she does select a hill to die on towards the end. But I think at that point in the story, it's like she just kind of is like, it's not worth it. It's not worth the explosion that it's going to cause.
Right.
She kind of does a covert, she'll like sneak around to comfort the granddaughter and to talk to John and that kind of thing. But like, as far as her daughter goes, she just kind of throws out some comments every now and then.
Right. Right. Mm-hmm.
And drinks wine.
Yeah. Cloris Leachman is amazing in that movie. So I thought it was just a great example of helping people understand how one person in a system can heal and can hurt, and the power that has, and the crazy making. I mean, when I see this movie, I just think, oh my gosh, Bernie and Georgie are going to have the biggest therapy bills of all time, because they are going to have to unpack. I mean, it's something. Although they 2-3 times a day.
Balanced right now. Like it seems like they were taking it, and maybe that's because of the offset from John. Yeah. Like I don't know, but also in this movie, like his kettle started boiling. So like.
Yes. I'm curious what you think Deborah's clinical diagnosis.
I was going to ask you. I don't think it's borderline.
Okay.
Because, I mean, as I understand borderline, like the number one fear is fear of abandonment. Mm-hmm. And then the way that the biggest thing I learned about it was always, and we don't have video on the podcast, so like you guys are going to miss out a little bit on this, but like if I hold my left hand up as if I'm telling you to stop and don't come closer, while at the same time signaling with my right hand for you to come closer, that's kind of what I understood borderline to be. Okay. So it never felt like she was scared of John leaving.
Mm-hmm. Until the end,
but it was almost like she had to be told to be scared of him leaving by her mom. So even then I kind of felt like, because her mom was like, the only thing you should say when he gets back is, I'm so glad you're back. And she's like, but I need to explain, but I need to, so it was like, even then she had to be told, this is what you need to do. So it wasn't like a natural, I'm scared of this. So I kind of thought, and I always get them mixed up between bipolar 1 and 2. Which one has the manic episodes?
Right. I kind of thought that too. And I can't remember either. It's complicated. When we learned about it, it was complicated. Yeah, we'll have to look that up. Yeah, I mean, I think that you can have female narcissists.
Oh, yeah.
So I think that she for sure is one. I like to tell people that a point of like, hey, is this person have a personality disorder or not? The whole, like, this is a KK Ray quote. She says, you kind of have to constantly tell yourself there are two people in this conversation and I'm not the crazy one, over and over again. If you're having to kind of in your internal monologue say that, that is maybe a good indicator. And then also the gaslighting and making everything about you, or, you know, making it, if it's coming from that person, making everything about them. They cannot see anything from anybody else's perspective. Like, it's impossible. So very much a lack of empathy, a sense of grandiosity, how everything is major, and yeah.
Yeah, it's very clear that she wasn't able to see from others' perspectives. And so I found out bipolar 1 has the manic episodes.
Okay.
Bipolar 2 just has the depressive. So I thought maybe bipolar 1, because it definitely seemed like she had times of mania.
Yes.
But I think the narcissistic personality disorder, now that you're saying that, especially with the lack of ability to see from another's perspective, and then even, you know, when challenged a little bit, like the part where her mom does confront her at the end, you know, she even says, I am the way that I am because of you.
Right.
Like, it's all your fault that I'm like this. And I really liked how her mom responded in that moment, because she didn't try to defend that. Maybe because she knows better, maybe because it's true. But she was like, that may be true, but what's happening right now is what we need to deal with, and that is you know, this thing.
You gotten yourself into a heap of mess.
Yeah. And she had the best quote, but I'll save that because I know that you have that for later. But yeah, maybe I think it's interesting too that you brought up that, like, you can have women narcissists. I never thought that you couldn't. Is it just typically that's a trait or a PD found in males?
Yeah, like I always kind of like out in the world, just people saying like, oh yeah, males are narcissists and females are borderline. Like that borderline was kind of the female version of narcissism. We could probably get a DSM expert to come in here and school us on that. But, and the reason why I will say I am schooled in the DSM, but it doesn't come up that much in therapy because I don't take insurance. And so I don't have to diagnose very often. And so, and if somebody needs a clinical diagnosis enough to where it's like, I don't know, it's affecting their day to day, and this is a real issue, I refer them out. That's just not
and the
in my
biggest
wheelhouse.
reason why we would want to provide a resource for a diagnosis, or even like we're qualified to diagnose, we can diagnose, but that's to grant the client access to resources they wouldn't have without a diagnosis.
Right.
Just because a diagnosis stays with a person.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's on a medical record.
Yep.
And so, if they're applying for a certain job and those records get checked, like,
Mm-hmm.
so it's not something that we take lightly. It's not just a fun puzzle that we're trying to solve.
Right.
And we give an it's not like that thing on Wheel of Fortune where there's certain letters that are blank and, we just shout out oh yeah, you're bipolar. Like it's not that kind of thing. It's such a serious thing to steward. And so we don't want to diagnose unless, like I said, it grants them access to something they wouldn't have without it.
That's right.
So that it's for the benefit, and that's really the magic word in all of therapy, for the benefit of the client.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I tell people because they're like, why don't you take insurance? That's a real bummer. And I tell people, I often don't believe in pathologizing people. I mean, I don't believe in diagnosing all the time because I could put myself in the DSM at different points in my life. Sure, I had a depressive episode, or sure, I had a generalized anxiety disorder at one point, and then I got tools to deal with that. And now I'm better. And my hope, I mean, there are some people who just will deal with certain things for the rest of their life. If they are bipolar, they will likely deal with that for the rest of their lives and need to get tools in their toolbox to help with that. But somebody has an adjustment disorder because they just got a divorce just feels kind of cruel. An adjustment disorder only lasts, you can only put that for 6 months.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit like you're really sad and chaotic because you're going through a major life change.
Well, and I think when we were in advanced abnormal psych, I think, we all were a little bit stunned and concerned because as basically we spent all of our time in that class. The prof would show a movie clip or read a case study and then say, all right, diagnose. And we would go through our DSM-5 and we'd try to find something. But as we would go through, we were all stunned and shocked because the way that it works is it's not just you flip to a page, it tells you like bipolar 1 and it gives you a 1-sentence definition and that's what you go off of. There's usually between 5 to 9 criteria.
Yes.
And so you have to meet X amount of those criteria, and sometimes it's even like, and it has to have shown up during this age, and it has to have lasted this long. So there's all of these qualifications, and then as we're kind of going through and learning about all these, what we found was, and I'm using we because it was everyone in the class, not the royal we, but like all of us would meet 2, 3, 4 of every personality disorder, except ones that were maybe gender specific. And it was like, okay, so clearly, which I think for me was comforting because one of my biggest things, going into therapy as a client and therapy as a career was, crazy is a dismissive term.
Exactly.
Nobody's crazy. We all just have a bad case of being a person and we're all just doing our best. And so what it kind of showed me was, oh, okay, so this person isn't broken. This person isn't crazy because I've got at least 3 or 4 of these criteria that I'm rocking with too. They're doing their best.
Right.
And they're trying.
Yes.
And so to offer a diagnosis when one is not needed, I think would not just not be helpful, but it would be harmful.
Exactly.
Potentially to a client.
I had one other thing I was going to talk about with this film, and maybe it's okay to bring it up now, but just the cultural differences and how that is something important that we need to think about in like the therapy room. So in this movie, the machismo, the macho man is something that Floor is really used to. So she sees this American man being soft and vulnerable, and she's just blown away by that. And obviously we have our own version of what males in America, cultural, whatever.
Which I would say, I mean, toxic masculinity is probably what we would
Exactly.
refer to that as.
Yeah. Yeah. Flexing muscles, whatever. So we have our own version of that. But I think our generation and the ones coming up behind us are learning that there's a balance and that it's important for males to feel their emotions just as much as women. And so I obviously that's a big part of this movie, and how much she wants to root her daughter in what she knows and what's important and the value system that her culture has versus the culture in America. And obviously not all families are like the Kloskis.
Yeah, although I'll say this, like the machismo thing, the very first introduction to Flor that we get in the movie is Christina saying that she never saw her mother cry, that her mother would always exit the room and deal with it and then come back in collected. And so it's not even as if, Flor was this model of connecting with all of your emotions. Clearly anger, passion, those are ones that she connected with versus, sadness, grief, those kinds of things were not.
Right. Yeah, she says to her daughter, you can cry one single tear.
Make it a good one.
Make it a good one about leaving her homeland to go to another country. It's like, yeah.
Which, now that you say that was something that I don't think I noticed before, was that they were undocumented.
Yes.
They leave Mexico and they are in a pickup truck with rolling luggage and they get dropped off and they start walking into a desert.
Right. And she has heels on.
Which I hope was the actual border and that it wasn't like she then had to walk a significant, length of way. There was a storyline in the last season of Orange is the New Black where they're dealing with immigration and ICE and deportation and things like that. And this mother gets deported back to El Salvador. And then, she is trying to get back and at one point breaks her ankle out in the desert and the group has to leave her. And so the end of this person's story is just he leaves her with a bottle of water and puts her in shade and says, I'm so sorry, I'll try to come back for you. But I can't stop the whole group because of you. And so I hope that where they were getting dropped off was really close. I mean, they made it.
Right.
And then I think the next part picks up with them in LA. Because I used to live in San Diego. I could see Tijuana from my balcony at night, mainly because of the lights. But they passed a giant city to get to another giant city.
Yes.
But yeah, so they came undocumented, and then the whole way that they end up with the Klaskis is Christina says that Flor was working 2 jobs to make $450 a week between the 2 of them. And then it's this scene where she's at a dance or something, and Flor sees a young man move his hand from her back to her butt. And then it says she realizes, oh, I can't be gone at night anymore.
Yes.
So I got to find one job that pays $450. So she answers the interview or the ad for the interview for the housekeeper, I don't know, nanny. I don't know what she was for them.
A little bit of everything.
Yeah. But I think, and last week's episode on the movie Lion, which if you haven't seen it, oh my gosh, if you want a really good cry, a good, not a really sad, mad kind of, but a really good cry, Lion.
Okay.
Leigh-Ann at the end of the episode brought up the difference between integration and assimilation.
Yes.
And my wife is the smartest person that I know, and I try to tell as many people that as I can. Coming from a social work background, integration is I'm going to hold these 2 things equally at the same time.
Yes.
Assimilation is I'm going to lose myself into this thing. And at one point, And Fleur really throughout the movie does her best to maintain her own identity and to I don't know if I want to say she does her best to help Christina maintain hers. I think she does her best to protect hers because it feels like it's not really Christina's choice. Fleur's basically trying to like stand in front of her and ward off any Americanizing kind of. But then at one point she decides, I need to learn English fluently. I think that the program, quote unquote, that she orders was a group of CDs off of television.
Mm-hmm.
And like Christina says, it was a down payment of X and then monthly payments of Y. And then she says something along the lines of, I forget the exact quote, but like the cost of assimilation is so high.
Yes.
And I think because of the discussion that Leigh-Ann and I had about lion, that word just like my spidey sense just picked up on it so much.
Right.
Because I thought, I don't know if I would say that Fleur is trying to assimilate, but I think that is something that plays in the movie so heavily.
Yes.
Is because I think Christina ultimately wants that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think at least at the beginning of the story, and certainly whenever they move to the beach, in a really innocent way, because she's just blown away by all this stuff that she's seeing, and I can't believe I get to be a part of all this stuff.
Right.
But then it changes from an I get to I deserve, or this is what I need, or how dare you take me out of, that kind of thing.
Yes. Yes. Well, and to talk about assimilation, I mean, the title of the movie is Spanglish.
Yeah.
And how that is.
I don't think I'd ever thought of that. Huh.
Yeah, like that's the title of the movie, and just how for both parties, they had to do some adjusting and she had to do some adjusting, and in order to make it work. But yeah, just the different value system, when she, at the end of the movie, when Christina publicly scorns her mom in the middle of the street, I mean, you just don't do that, in Mexican culture. And
well, you don't do that in Southern culture either.
Right,
like,
yeah.
I have said many times, like, when I've seen things or whatever, that like, oh my gosh, if I would have said something like that to my mom or dad out in public, like,
oh yeah, yeah,
it'd have been the death of me.
Yes, exactly, for sure. And yeah, to see this, even the kids, I don't know if you remember, but when Christina's going with her mom to the beach for the summer, and the kids are all on the balcony going Malibu, Malibu, like they're kind of making fun of her, for going with this family, yeah, it is such a brilliant film, and I pick up something every time that's different, and even in the dialogue, I mean, I could nerd out on like all the literary elements that are going on in there. At one point, when John is talking about his restaurant, he works in this, amazing restaurant. He is an amazing artist as a chef. But that whole push-pull of we need art to sell, but we don't want to sell out. And he is just desperate to keep his identity, but doesn't want to sell out. And he's kind of doing some of that in his marriage as well, where he has to sort of be understated. And
he keeps using the term under the radar.
Yes. Yeah, I wrote down the quote, you're right there below the radar. It's a good life, when he was talking about his restaurant and how he did not want all of these critics to come in and make it something, commercial and, lines wrapped around the block. And we're kind of dealing with that in Nashville right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But at any time a article comes out about Nashville being the it city, I'm like, shh.
Yeah.
We don't need anybody
no more
else.
bachelorette parties.
Yeah.
We don't need any more woos.
We're no more woo-woo girls and no more pedal taverns. Have you seen the latest that there is
Dinner in the Sky?
No, it's a fire truck. And it literally looks like a fire truck, but it is a party bus.
Oh.
And I'm like, is that legal? Like,
Oh, I just saw this past week Dinner in the Sky.
okay, what is that?
It's a table with like either 6 or 8 chairs around it, glass floor. You sit in the chairs, you strap in, a crane raises you up, and you eat dinner in the sky. And your chairs can recline all the way back.
Okay, this sounds like a lawsuit waiting to happen.
Yeah, or a dare.
Yeah.
Or like Fear Factor or something.
Yeah.
But it's a real thing in Nashville.
They're like, while we're under construction, let's also make money on stupid people.
Which it sounds stupid unless they want to sponsor the show. So like if you want to, therapisttheater@gmail.com. This week's episode is brought to you by.
Yes, exactly.
So I think I want to talk more about John because I think that, I mean, we could nerd out diagnostically on Deborah all day, but I think John's the more interesting character. And especially hearing you talk about how involved you are in the Enneagram in your work.
Yes.
I do want to ask you to give me some numbers for, like, what do you think the Deborah, because I was trying to nail that down today.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I know.
So that's where it's difficult when somebody does have a lot of pathology. It's hard to know what is personality and what is pathology.
Mm-hmm.
She comes across as a 3 to me. She's very image oriented.
I ran track in high school or in college.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Very competitive. Left every time she runs. She, is wanting, I mean, even kind of is obsessed with Christina because Christina fits what she believes is.
Oh, I didn't think that. I think you're right. My first thought was Deborah has this innate need to be adored. And Christina, having never been around someone like Deborah and being amazed at all of these resources and all that, just adored her. And she just latched onto that.
Yes,
like,
I think
and
it's
I think
both.
That's why she took Christina those 2 times.
Yes.
Was because like, oh, you're feeding this thing that I have inside of me.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I think there's both. I think when Christina looks at her in the car and says, I think you're the most amazing woman or whatever she says. And Deborah's like, thank you, and then also that when she first sees Christina and she's this beautiful, trim little girl, that's very sure of herself because Christina has had to, be the interpreter for her mom in some very not so great situations, in very adult situations. I'm thinking of the men that wanted to buy her a drink.
Oh, yeah.
She's had to, she had to translate an argument, between John and Fleur. And so she's very sure of herself in a lot of ways. And I think that fits Deborah's ideal of what she has.
So John, I'm going to say 9.
Okay.
For John. I could also see 4, but just because in a semi-creative field, but I don't think he has that need to be unique. I think he wants the under the radar too much to really lean into 4.
I was thinking 2, but you might be right. I mean,
see 2.
Yeah, I mean, I could see 9 for sure. And the reason why I say 2 is like maybe a worn out 2.
Isn't that every 2?
Exactly. They wear exhaustion like a badge, to quote Brene Brown. Yeah, but maybe you're right with the 9. Like, I just want to be understated, and
Because I
under the
think,
radar,
the
easygoing.
peacemaker, because I do think that it's not that he runs away from any conflict. He doesn't engage in it as a default. So it's not like
Right.
he runs in with a sword and shield. He does kind of a covert swing back. So I could see that being a quality of a 2. It's almost more like a healthy 9, where it's not like running. It is an active trying to engage in peace, but it's almost like an espionage kind of way of doing it.
Yeah, and 2s and 9s share a lot of qualities, but I think the biggest difference between them is just that helper role and their busyness. I think 2s just, they're doing a lot more, I think, than 9s are. But they also are very, they're in the heart triads. They're very connected to their emotions. So, and he seems really tuned in. Now that could be growth, like a 9 moving towards health, but
Is he? Because he explodes at several parts of the movie.
yes, I guess I was thinking the little scene with him and Bernie towards the end where he, is just amazed at her emotional intelligence and intuition and kind of connects with her. And I think he kind of tears up a little bit. But yeah, you're right. I mean, 9s are the angriest number on the Enneagram.
Oh, I didn't know that. I guess that makes sense, though. I mean, if in an unhealthy way, if they're repressing.
Yeah.
Which would lead to depression, too.
Yep.
What do you think about Floor? What do I think about Floor?
I mean, she has some 8. Yeah. That's what I was thinking. Is she has some 8 in her, and spunk and fire, and I mean, that beautiful Latina thing.
Maybe like a really healthy 8, because I think I've been around some 8s that seem more like they're contrarians. And like they just gotta, no matter what you say, they gotta protest it somehow.
Yes.
I said that really in a southern way. Protest it. They gotta protest it. I don't know how to say it differently.
Protest.
Yeah. But she, it seems like she has her boundaries and her identity, and it's not really until she's not looking for a fight.
Yes.
But she's ready for one.
Yes. Paz Vega is her name, is the actress's name, and she is actually not Mexican, but she's Spanish. And according to Richard Rohr's Enneagram book, Spains are associated with 8.
Huh.
There is this very life force, passionate, you think about bullfighting and, all the things that go with Spanish culture. There's a real about
I'm so afraid to know if he has slapped a number on Americans.
Oh, of course he has.
What is it?
What do you think it is?
Oh gosh, I don't know. What would a number represent passive aggressiveness? Like that would be.
Oh, well, you have to think about like the number is 3. So you have to think about climbing that ladder. Always be our best selves, always striving, achieving.
To earn your spot.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So to like go back to John, it seemed like he was the withdrawer in the marriage.
100%.
And that Deborah was the pursuer. Although I think that's a good example of an adaptive role rather than a natural one. Because it did seem, it seemed like connected with the majority of his emotions. He was comfortable engaging in difficult conversations. But, there's a difference between bracing yourself for a little wave when you're walking out into the ocean and a tidal wave coming at you. Like,
right.
That seems like what the experience was like with her. But like I said, there were several times in the movie where he did kind of explode.
Mm-hmm.
You know, sometimes when he thought he was by himself and there were other people around, and then sometimes when he was like in the car with Floor taking her to the bus stop. I think maybe he was kind of leaning on that. She doesn't speak English, so I can. It's almost like I'm by myself. I can say whatever I want and do whatever I, kind of thing. But then, one of the major storylines of it is that Deborah, I'm not quite sure what she was. She said to have another place or something. She goes out with a realtor, but I wasn't quite sure what the aim of that was.
Well, she was wanting to find a rental for the summer.
For them?
Yes.
Okay.
So
I thought that it was like she was going to start a business, like it was going to be that kind of thing, but...
Yeah, I think he helped her find the beach house. That's the way I interpreted it.
Yeah.
And then once he flipped those windows and made her hair float back like a Barbie doll going down the Pacific Coast Highway. It was like ding, 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 ding.
And she says in that moment, and I thought this was so bold. She says when she's leaning her head back and her hair is like blowing as it should be, according to her. She says, "Oh, I bet you're trouble." And I thought that's a really bold, like assertion there. So she ends up having an affair with this guy for, she says, 11 weeks.
Yes.
And there's a scene where, and I can't recall what made that come out other than like John was experiencing more stress with work and her natural kind of state is anxiety. And so when he tells her to keep his, I guess it was his sous chef, I don't know. He had to give him 20% of the restaurant to keep him there. She, this is what made me think bipolar 1. Oh, I guess I don't matter at all. Like, you didn't mention that to me. And she like sinks into the bed, where you can only see like her forehead and her eyes. And
like
so,
a fear of not existing. Like she kept, it's like this deep fear of like, I don't matter. And if I don't matter, what does that mean? And so I'm going to make myself matter by being as large as I possibly can.
So I think maybe, the reason why she ended up telling him was the grandma or somebody said something about, you're about to lose. No, that was after that. I don't remember why she told him about the affair. How did that come out?
Well, because, great segue, you didn't plan this, but it's a great segue into both of our favorite quotes. She's about to go out. That was a different night. That when she's sinking in and he's telling her I had to give 20%, she's in the bed. The next day or a couple of days later, she's leaving to go out with her.
But like at night, she's leaving at night.
Yes, she's leaving at night. And that's when the grandmother, her mother, confronts her. And because the grandmother's all too keen, probably because the grandmother did that kind of behavior when she was, Deborah's age.
Which grandmother was some kind of singer.
She was a jazz singer, and she sold 75,000 copies of her record, which was really good for a jazz record, she says. And it is good. So she confronts Deborah in the driveway and says, "You are about to lose everything that you have, and this is a good man, and you're not going to be able to find anybody like John." And she's like, "There you go again, Mother, making me feel terrible about myself.
It's all about me.
It's all about me." Yeah. And and so the quote that both you and I have agreed, lately your low self-esteem is just good common sense.
I love it so much.
It's so good.
It's loving. It's a sick burn. Ugh.
Yeah. And I think because of that, that realization, I think that she starts to go, we don't see this, but I think she starts to go out, but maybe turns the car around and starts to have this meltdown about, oh my gosh, I've been sleeping with someone else. what have I done?
Which really, in that case, and I have seen this a lot in my work with clients. The disclosure came out of, I can't bear the guilt and the shame, so I need to unload it.
Right.
Not, I've done my work, I've processed why this has happened, and now I need to tell you for the health and the good of the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
It was more just like, I'm getting buried under this guilt and shame, and I got to unload it and get rid of it, so you take it.
And even in her confession, it's still all about her.
Yeah.
She can't even see John's pain in telling him. She's like, okay, here's how we're going to get through this. And he's like,
she's trying to jump to the end.
Yeah. She's trying to jump to the forgiveness part, and we're going to just skip through. And I remember she loves she is addicted to chaos and intensity too, because she's like, we're just going to talk till we can't say anything else, and we're just going to talk our guts out. And you can see him going, no, that's not how this is going to go down. And let me tell you what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. I'm going to leave right now. And that just had never happened. He had always done whatever she wanted to do to keep the peace. And it had worked up until then.
Yeah, I think he says in that part, this is a common saying, a common theme with the Klasky's. I need a minute. I need space, which leads to my second favorite quote that Floor says later, but we'll get to that.
Yes.
Yeah. So when I first got into therapy as a client, and this is why I went the MFT route as well. It was because a relationship that I had been in was surfacing something in me that I realized, I need to work on this. And the more I talked with my therapist about that relationship, eventually he said to me, it sounds like it was really intense and not really intimate. And I remember at the time thinking, I don't know what you just said. Like, can you, intimacy, what? Can you unpack that? Like, what is that,
Yeah.
And I think that's a good example of where John and Deborah were, is that she is so intense with this tidal wave of everything that it's really tough to be intimate. And you even see that in their, I guess it was a sex scene, like in the movie.
Bizarre.
Ish. And it's after the review of his restaurant comes out in the paper, which he had said, I just want 3.25 stars. That's good enough. It's under the radar. He gets 4 stars, and the reviewer actually says the best chef in the country, in the world, something like that.
In the country, yeah.
Yeah. So she reads it, runs upstairs, and you can see in his body language, he's like bracing himself.
Yeah.
Because he has no idea how this is going to manifest in her. And she like tears his shirt off, jumps on top of him, and is this like dramatic, I don't even know how to describe it, but basically like,
again, it's all about her.
Yeah. So she, I don't know how to say it on a podcast, finishes first and then begins to cry because she, I think, realized in that moment, I forgot about him.
Do you think?
I think so, because then
wondering,
he goes straight to, it's okay, it's all right, it's fine.
Yeah, well, he's like, don't do this now. That's where her bipolar, to me, really was coming out, was like this, she has this great experience, but it's so vulnerable. I mean, it's almost like this release, but then that's where I kind of went with it. It's like, it's such a vulnerable place, but because she does kind of leave him without, I don't know if it's like
vulnerability in that moment, because it seemed like she just went straight in, boom, bulldozer, and then that was it.
And maybe, they had just a day or two earlier had that fight in the bathroom where he cupped her breast, and he was trying to make it all better and smooth things over, and she felt really unseen by him. And
she said, do you really think that's going to make it right? And he said, well, it has before. And then he said, was it the wrong breast?
Right. And she's like, oh, you can't believe. And so I wondered if it was like a little, not that she can get vulnerable, but it's a little bit of a vulnerability hangover of like, I just did something with you and released myself to you, but I'm still mad at you about things that you do. I don't know. It was a confusing
I kind of
part.
thought that,
but it obviously had happened before. The way that he's like, oh, don't do this. Like he knew that was kind of coming.
I kind of thought that she had a little too much control sexually to be vulnerable, but that's just how I read it.
I mean, it was kooky.
So she had this affair with this real estate agent for 11 weeks that she says. And then in this disclosure, John then is asking, did you have sex? And she starts to kind of dance around the answer. And he's like, no, it's a yes or no answer. Did you have sex? And she says, yes. And then that's when he, like you said, he kind of lays out, this is how things are going to go now.
Right.
These are the consequences of this. And I think really what I wanted to talk about with John was his, I don't know if you can call it just an emotional affair with Fleur, because they do end up kissing, but clearly Fleur sees something in John that she had not seen in many men or any men before. And John sees something in Fleur that was, in the best way I think for him, strange and attractive, and I think safe. And that's really probably him picking up on these healthy boundaries that she has, and how, if Deborah is this tidal wave, then Fleur is the, still water.
Yes.
Me flexing my metaphors. But, at some point, I know what it was. I think it was after Deborah had taken Christina out and gotten the highlights and then got her the scholarship to the school, is when Fleur takes him down to the beach to talk with him or something. And then he's a little drunk or something like that, and he sees her in the wind, and it's like he awakens to an attraction that he has for her. But it kind of I don't know if it progresses. That's what I really wanted to get your input on, is he attracted to her? I mean, clearly he is, but is it an intentional thing, or is he just running from the chaos that is Deborah to what he perceives as stillness and safety?
I think it's both, but I think they haven't had enough time together to really, really know each other. But there is this meeting of the minds that they have. And I mean, she is so beautiful. I mean, # girl crush. She is so beautiful and so just herself. And it is so opposite of what he's experiencing in his marriage that, I think it's the perfect storm in a lot of ways, that he is experiencing this sexual attraction to her, but also this emotional connection and safety that he hasn't felt. And he brings that up a lot in the scene with them in his restaurant, how foreign that is to have someone who sees him when she apologizes to him and says, you were right. He's like, wow, what is this experience of having somebody who does not defend themselves to the death?
Yeah. And that was, she was mad of the wife taking Christina, but then he said, well, how is that different than you altering Bernie's clothes?
Right.
And she just, oh yeah, you're right. Yeah.
It's the same thing.
Yeah. Which it reminds me of a John Gottman quote I read a couple of weeks ago, and it was, couples get stuck when they are so concerned with defending their intentions instead of seeing the hurt of their partner.
Yes.
And in that moment, she didn't defend intentions. She
yes.
just went, oh yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
And she met him there,
Mm-hmm.
even though they're not a couple. But yeah.
Yes. Yeah. They, I read on the IMDb page that they had to add a couple of scenes because they did some test screenings and people were really upset about the way the movie ended. So I'm guessing the original was just kind of like they don't end up together and he goes back to his marriage and that was it, but maybe they had to add this whole coming back to full circle that these two women have each other, that Fleur and her daughter have each other and they're each other's safety net and family. But I remember the first time I saw it, like, there is that part of you that wants them to run away together, but then you think, he can't run away. The fact is, he has 2 children, and she says that. She goes, there are just certain things that are unforgivable with children.
Oh, and he said at some point about her being a widow. And she was like, I'm not a widow. Why would you think I'm a widow?
And he's like, why would anybody leave you intentionally?
Yeah. That was kind of, I think, the first time he showed his cards a little bit about what was going on inside of him.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that I felt, and I think I have started to become aware of this through doing this show, about how movies sometimes intentionally are manipulating us to feel a certain way about a character. Whereas, and a movie is a slice of a story, whereas in real life, all of us are more complicated than an hour and a half can bear out. So like Leigh-Ann, when we did the episode on Instant Family with Summer Kerwin, she really felt a lot of conflict inside about the movies positioning us to cheer for these 2 white people to take away the kids of this woman of color. And it's really trying its best to have us cheer that on. And I think in this one, it was kind of steering you to cheer for him to leave with Fleur. And I think Fleur, like you're saying, became the voice of sanity, which that was another quote, from John. Another great quote in the movie was he said something about caring for your kids or loving your kids is the most sane thing you can do, and that kind of sanity will make you crazy. Yeah. And I think that that's really what gets her to kind of shake loose the starry eyes and say, like, no, wait, this is our reality. But I think that it does position you to kind of cheer for them. And I think it's another example of, which I don't know the timeline of the movie. How long of a period is this? At least 3 months because of them going to and leaving Malibu. But, when they're in the restaurant and they're sitting on this bench and he says, oh, if our feet touch the floor, we got to be better out. And she just says, I love you. And then the camera is foot level and it shows her feet hitting the floor and her taking off. Maybe that is another example of intensity over intimacy. Yeah. Because they, like in Speed, I'm jumping back and forth between too many movies, they talk about like this intense situation bonding people, and maybe weathering Hurricane Deborah, the 2 of them, that really was an intense kind of bonding situation for them.
Yeah. And you bring up a good point, because there was all of this sexual tension between John and Fleur, but that's not what you build like a life around. And I think she knows that deep down inside, and he does too. And maybe that's what he and Deborah, how they came together. There was this hurricane and this wild, and it awakened something in him. But you can't build a sustainable life around that. And Fleur didn't want to be another hurricane or even a small little rainstorm in his life.
Yeah. And that, makes me think about that quote that Fleur said to Christina, which I think it's the, I don't want to say opposite, but it's the reflection, it's the adverse of what all of the Klasky's have been saying. I need a minute. I need some space. There's that part after Christina like rages at Floor because she says, I'm taking you out of the private school as they're walking back to the bus stop. And then, and her narration is going on about how like I confronted my mom in public and I challenged her and all this. And then she says to her mom, I need a minute. I need some space. And Floor spins around and gets up in her face and says, no space between us.
Yeah.
And like, that was a really powerful moment to me because I think that there is like a question of cultural conflict. That I'm thinking in that moment too, because I think as a therapist, we do talk with clients all the time about healthy boundaries, and sometimes you need a minute and things like that. But there's also this thirst and need for intimacy to where when I hear that quote, especially coming from Florida Christina, I'm like, yes.
That's right.
So I'm cheering both the I need space and I need a minute and the no space between us.
Yes.
And I don't know if the I need a minute part of me is the American part of me. Because I don't know, which I'm sure like most things in life, it's gray. It's probably a mixture of both. Like it's important for us to have both, but
yeah. And I think it's micro macro too. I think that, for the situation, all the things that she and her daughter had been through. And I feel this way a lot with my oldest son. We joke and say we've toured Nam together. And it has bonded us in a lot of ways. And so I see myself in Floor and her daughter and just that bond that's there. I mean, they've left their home country. They had to go through the desert and, go to a place where they didn't know anybody and anything and then go through all of this together.
They knew Floor's cousin.
Oh yeah.
But that's all.
Right.
That's all they knew.
Right.
Yeah.
This foreign land. And so they've been through all this stuff together, just the two of them. I think it is okay to take little breaks here and there and to have space. And they started to have space on the bus. They sat in two different seats. But I think macro, big picture, Floor's like, there is no space between us. That will kill us if we do that. And so I think it's taking each moment and each storyline and thinking through the small effects and the big effects.
Yeah, it reminds me of like incidents over pattern. Like they have a pattern of intimacy in their relationship. And so every now and then, if you need a minute, if you need a bus ride, that's okay. But that's not the foundation that the relationship is built on.
Right.
Yeah, it's a foundation of intimacy.
Yes.
Is there anything else from the movie that sticks out to you? Like, I feel like we could do a couple of episodes because, like I said, like the movie has 300 things. Like,
oh my gosh,
it's crazy.
So many things. You could talk about alcoholism with the grandmother. You could talk about teenage relationships and the building safety with teenagers.
Yeah. I think we talk about family legacies.
Oh yeah.
Like we could do a genogram like on this family and talk about what gets handed down and
yep. All the things. Yeah. I love that the movie ends with I am my mother's daughter. That she just a couple of years later, I mean, it's not, because she's 13 or whatever in the movie, but at 18, just 5 years later, 17 maybe even, she has come full circle that this human being is not only my mother, but I am her. And I want to be just like her. And
almost like I want to be more like her.
Yes. Yeah. And so I think that's such a great cap to the end of the movie. And even though in the end, they do end up on the bench seat together on the bus, it took a lot of hellacious stuff to get them there. And when it's all said and done, family matters.
Yeah. Yeah. Such a good movie.
So great.
There's also some artistic things that happen in it. I'm going to nerd out for a sec that I was a little bit shocked by and didn't remember. Like just like in-camera zooms.
Yes.
And I think that
I know what you mean.
that's something that I had seen in like some of Joss Whedon's work, like in the show Firefly and the movie Serenity. And then that got copied in Battlestar Galactica as an influence. But like here, I think that James Brooks, I think he does it at moments of clarity or realization for characters because it happens whenever Floor says I love you and gets up from the bench and walks off. It zooms in on John's face. And it happens, I think, just before Deborah comes in to have sex with John. I think it zooms in on John again there. But like that's a thing you don't really see in a lot of movies is in camera zooms in on a character. Usually it'll cut from a wide shot to a close up.
Yeah.
You know, instead of showing that zoom. And then the dialogue, there's a YouTube channel that I follow, Nerd Writer 1, like the numeral 1.
Mm-hmm.
And he has an episode on Noah Baumbach, on the way that he writes dialogue. And there's a movie that's on Netflix, and I can't remember the name of it now, but it's got Adam Sandler and it's got Dustin Hoffman. But the guy is talking about how the way that he writes dialogue is really realistic because in most movies, the dialogue is person A speaks and they stop speaking, and then person B speaks, and then person A and person B. Whereas Baumbach always has people talking over each other.
Uh-huh.
And so like the way that Brooks, I think, wrote this, I think there's moments it feels really realistic, like with John's rage bubbling out sometimes, with Deborah's, I'm going to say, justifications of her actions.
Uh-huh.
There's other times where I feel like it's a fantasy. Like Bernie is, which maybe it's not, maybe this is like an adaptive skill that she's learned. She's a little too emotionally intelligent to where she like comforts and calms dad and kind of, especially after the review comes out, like parents dad a little bit in that moment. I'm so proud of you.
Right. That
kind of thing to kind of like settle him down. And then, you know, grandma's a little quippy, that kind of thing. But overall, I felt like, I think a lot of that stuff could be adaptive strategies of the family to kind of weather the storm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
Sarcasm and funny quips and passive aggression and like all of that kind of stuff. It's just so good.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's my nerdy part. Tell me something that your clients have taught you.
Oh, man. I think that my clients teach me just how resilient people are. I know that sounds really like a Hallmark card, but just to see what people have weathered and gone through. And I think we read a book in school called The Heroic Client.
Yeah, I got it.
Yeah, just that theme of it really is they are the hero to show up for therapy to begin with, because it's such a vulnerable process. And then just people's resilience and yeah.
Does it inspire you to be more resilient?
100%. Yeah. It inspires me to be, I have a lot of stuff in my story. And so to see other people's stories, it encourages me. Like, yeah, I think another thing I would say is that to trust the process.
Mm-hmm.
I say that all the time, the good Chip Dodd quote, you know, that we really can, there is a process happening and we really can trust it. And so there have been clients that I think, man, I just don't know how they're going to get to the other side of this, or they're so in the weeds. And then to see them 6 months later and they're saying some of the same things that maybe I said in the beginning, but it's coming out in their own words and it's actually sticking. And it's like, oh, okay, like if you stick this thing out, like therapy works.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, we really can trust the process. And when you're in suffering, we think that it will always be that way.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's taught me like, oh yeah, there is a beginning and a middle and an end. And it gives me courage when I'm dealing with all my stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I'm really inspired by my clients too. And there's tons of times where I'll get home at the end of a day, and because of movement that I've seen in a client, it'll cause something to bubble up in me, and I'll want to talk to Leigh-Ann about it. Not about what the client's saying, but about like the bubble up, in me. Let's say that somebody was listening to our conversation today and they think to themselves, man, I just think I could really connect with her and would love to see her as a client. How can they get a hold of you?
Yeah. So I have a website, RebeccaWalkerTherapy.com. Rebecca is spelled Rebecca. You can also email me at info@RebeccaWalkerTherapy.com. I don't know if this is appropriate to say, but there's another Rebecca Walker in town who is fantastic. We just do very different things, and she's about, I'm thinking like 15, 20 years older than me, and so we have gotten each other's clients.
Oh.
So it's been a little bit confusing, but she spells her name K-A-H at the end. And she kind of does more family stuff. I will see families, but she does just a little bit different work than I do. But
well, I'll make sure I write it out in the show notes so that they can just click on it if they want to do that too.
Yes. Yeah. So RebeccaWalkerTherapy.com. Email's a great way to start the process. And I can give you my rates and days available and all of that.
Very cool. Rebecca, thank you so much for coming on today.
Yes.
It is just such a pleasure to meet you
So fun.
to get to talk with you about this.
Yes, thank you.
Nice. Hello, my love.
Hey,
How's it going?
it's going good.
Well, here we are, ready to wrap the show up.
Yep.
You've got your furry weighted blanket
Mm-hmm.
at your feet.
I was gonna say it's really not a blanket today. It's a feet warmer, but
A foot blanket.
it'll do for now.
There you go. I love it. So, the things that you thought about the movie and about the interview, go.
Okay, well, first of all, the movie. I'm gonna preface this. No, this is the preface. What I'm about to say. The following is the preface.
Thank you, Pert Happy.
Spanglish, not my favorite. I don't know if I've probably had only a handful of movies on here that at the end I would say either just rent or like don't even rent or pass, which is that word.
It's true.
We're
not at that part of the show yet, but
well, I'm not going to give away my
spoilers.
answer, but I'm just saying I've only had a few and the answer is not going to be buy. It's going to be one of the two others. I'm not going to say which one it is.
Yeah.
But with that said, like I loved the interview. It was definitely one for like, you have this experience a lot where you watch a movie and you're kind of like meh, and then you listen to the interview and it makes you love the movie. So I will say the interview took me from being like, ugh, I don't know, to oh yeah, like I can see why people like it. And I do think this was a like phenomenal movie to pick for the podcast because there's, like you guys said, there's so many relationships in it. There's so many relationships, and there's also so much about like mental health. Like there's just so much in it.
Well, and also, I don't know if people in general liked this movie. It had an $80 million budget, and like after its run and everything, it didn't even make half that. So
Oh no.
I don't really know if we could say people liked it.
Yeah, but I mean, you and Rebecca seem to like it, so
Yeah.
that's more what I'm talking about. The first thing that I want to say, and I thought about this during the movie, and then you guys touched on it at the very beginning, is the storyline, the short storyline, where poor sweet Bernie, I know, where Deb is, pardon my French, but a total jerk.
Whoa. That might get us a strike.
I know.
I'll bleep you with the dolphin sound.
Okay, good. You really should. And just let people guess what I said. Yeah, that part of the movie just made me so sad. And also I don't remember if I've talked about it on the podcast, but at work recently I learned about this. It's like take body positivity and turn it up like 10 notches. It's a I don't know what you would call it. It's not a theory, but it's basically it's called
a philosophy.
Yeah, it's called Health at Every Size. And it's about positivity. It's about like not, participating in diet culture. And I'm going to pull up a quote from the American Pediatric Association right now, because basically like just thought it's worth throwing out there that like talking about dieting with your kids and stuff like that and their size is harmful. And the quote that we are using now to try to like help our volunteers and parents sort of deal with this is, the Pediatric Association did this whole study. They looked at like behaviors, like eating and dieting behaviors in adults who like dieted as children, basically. And this is like the quote from the article. Researchers suggest that future interventions in weight control focus on helping parents break the cycle by taking the focus off of dieting behaviors and instead encourage positive, healthy practices within the family. So like one of the things we've talked about is focusing on, oh my gosh, look at all the cool things that our bodies can do. Like we can run, we can play this game, and celebrating bodies instead of shaming somebody for theirs. So I thought that was super relevant, and it did make me really, really sad to see that played out and like to think about how that might impact her and how she views herself later in life. Health at Every Size is different. It's a little bit more extreme than that. Like it talks about fat phobia and like not even doing a directional thing, but that's totally different. And I don't know, like not doing that in a sneaky way to encourage them to do more positive, yeah. But that's like a different subject.
Is it healthy? I mean, like, because
this is I don't know anything about this. Everybody should go look this up. It's challenging. Like it challenges the idea that your BMI affects your health. What they say that they have found is that the stigma on having a bigger body is what negatively affects your health. Not having a bigger body.
Like a psychosomatic thing?
Yeah. So like there's like research.
Psychosomatic meaning that what you think affects your physical body.
Right. So they found research that showed that like a higher BMI didn't necessarily correlate with, more risk for heart disease or like all the stuff that we've been told.
Yeah.
And also just for the record, like this is new to me and I'm trying to learn more about it. It's challenging stuff, but it also is kind of cool and exciting. And, I don't know. So definitely encourage people to Google it and to to just look up their own, stuff about it. It's different, but I think it's also a cool movement. So anyways, I thought about that whenever I saw that scene with Deb and Bernie, because that was definitely a good depiction of, I think.
There were more than one scene, too.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that Rebecca said it best, like, that was more about Deborah than it was about Bernie.
Yeah.
And I just said to a client today, you know, the best thing that a parent can do for their kids is to deal with their own stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So if Deborah were addressing, you know, the drive that she has to work on herself and what that's about, you know, then there's a chance that she might not have had to transfer it to Bernie.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah. I loved hearing you guys talk about Deb's like personality and potentially personality disorder. That was really fascinating, and it helped me make a lot of sense of some of her behaviors. So that was cool. And then you talked about the assimilation versus integration thing again. And I agreed with you. Like when Christina said, she says something about the cost of assimilation and talking about her getting language. I also had a moment where I was like, well, I don't know if that's like assimilation, whatever. But when I heard you guys talking about it, a new thought sort of came to me that I think the reason she says it there is because prior to that, Fleur had fought so hard to not integrate. I mean, to not have any American culture. Like, so I think that's why
they even made that point when she altered Bernie's clothes. She had tried to keep a distance from the family as well, and then that was like her first foray into
so I think that's why she used that word, because to Fleur and to Christina, like that was her finally giving in, and like so that probably was to her assimilation, because it seemed like up to that point she was trying not to, like she didn't want to lose, you know.
Well, and they were also speaking of a literal cost, because she was talking about how much those CDs, how much,
which were very expensive.
Yeah.
Let's see. So then, you guys were talking about, what's Adam Sandler's name? John?
Adam Sandler?
No, his character's name. I think it's John. You guys said John.
John Klasky.
You're talking about him being a 2 versus a 9, and I don't know enough about the Enneagram to have a opinion on that, so I'm not necessarily going to say anything different. But when you were talking about that, I thought there was one thing that a 2 does that he did, and it was that he avoided conflict or like kept the peace, and I think he did it in a way that was and I'm using big quotations here, it was like a self-sacrificial, like what he would say is it was like a self-sacrificial love thing for him to keep the peace. Like that's how it seemed, like that was his reasoning, was like because he loves, what's the mom's name? Because
Deborah.
He loves Deb, he's not gonna disturb, whatever. There's all these things, and I think that can be a 2 thing too, though, because like a 2 will avoid addressing their own stuff or speaking their own needs or doing anything like that. It can be excused as quote unquote just like sacrificing themselves out of love, whereas really like a healthy 2 and a healthy person like understands that that's not real love. Like kind of throwing yourself on the ground to keep another person happy isn't real love. And I think he did that some, which is a 2
I think
thing
a lot
to do.
of them, and that's what we were kind of talking about, is that a personality thing, or did the whole family have to learn how to do that because of Deborah? And I think that each one of them did in different ways. Like they all learned how to live around her.
And maybe both. I think personality and, keep, whatever, moving around her.
Because my guess is her behavior was not new. Like she didn't just become like that. So probably for the kids' whole lives and for their whole relationship and for her mother's whole relationship with her.
And then the last thing was, and you guys talked about whenever at the end, Christina and Fleur are at the bus stop, and Christina says, "I need space," and then Fleur goes up to her and says, like, no space between us. And you guys were talking about that, and I think you were talking about how you, with clients and just in general, like, talk about boundaries being a good thing, and like I need space being an okay thing to say when, whatever, when it's a boundary. But then in this scene, like that was really powerful, and it was really meaningful. And you were also thinking like, yeah, no space, like no space, no space. And I thought, and you guys did talk about this, but like the difference in a boundary and intimacy. And I think if you're saying I need space to set a boundary, then that's healthy and good. But if you're saying I need space so that you can check out and not be present and not deal with stuff,
Withdraw. Yeah.
so that you can withdraw, that's not like, that's the difference.
Yeah.
That's the difference in it being a boundary and in it being keeping you from intimacy. Yeah. And I think like that was an example of what she was talking about was, no, we are going to have intimacy. Like we are going to know each other and we're going to talk about stuff. You don't get to run away from this. And I thought that was really
and
cool.
That could be just a mother recognizing that happening in her daughter. Like, you know, like what you're saying, if it's that, oh, I need a minute to collect myself so that I can stay engaged, that's one thing. But if it's I'm pulling back and I'm withdrawing from relationship, then that's another. And I think Flor spotted that happening, and that's why she said what she said.
Yeah. And that can be a really hard thing too. Like at some point, and I think you've talked about pursue, withdraw, like that can be hard for a pursuer to accept when a person says I need space, but it can be a healthy, like that can be healthy to do, and that's okay too. But yeah, I thought that was a really cool, just like a short scene, but it showed a really cool thing.
Yeah.
That's all.
That's all?
Yeah.
Nice. So, Spanglish, buy, rent, or pass?
Pass.
You're going to say pass?
Okay, maybe rent, just so you can listen. Rent it just so you can listen to this episode, because that's what makes it, for me, that's what made it worth it.
Yeah.
Yee.
I might say buy.
What?
I really like the movie.
Why?
Well, like I said, I had a different experience watching it as a therapist than I did before.
Right.
I don't think I totally know. I think because maybe it's because Adam Sandler on the scale of Billy Madison to Grown Ups is right in the middle. He's like the most normal that he's ever been. And I like it. And also there's that sandwich that he makes. It looks incredible.
Oh yeah, that's true.
And I'm a big fan of sandwiches.
I like sandwiches too.
I don't know. You never really go for sandwiches when
I do, but it's because I like a good sandwich.
Same.
No, but sometimes when we're talking about sandwiches in our home, it's like the lame sandwiches.
I've literally never made a lame sandwich. I'm offended.
Yes,
I'm a sandwich artist. # Subway.
PB&J.
If you want to sponsor no, you go for the PB&J more.
No, I know.
I like the meat on my sandwich, and I like a hot sandwich too.
I like both. I like all of those things, meat and a hot sandwich, but I want to have like lettuce and vegetables and sauce delicious and good bread, not just like sliced kitchen bread.
I like good Brad too.
No.
Brad with ketchup.
All right, Moira Rose.
That's how my wife says it. No, not Moira Rose.
I do not say Brad.
Right, you don't, but you do say ketchup.
Bread. Oh, I say ketchup.
And you say Philadelphia.
Philadelphia. That's how you say it.
Don't be a disgruntled pelican, David.
Thanks for joining us,
listeners.
You guys.
If you have not watched Schitt's Creek, I highly recommend you fire up the Netflix machine.
Yeah, we're all into it right now.
And give it a go.
Or I'm all into it right now, I should say.
I'm into it too.
You've been into it. You watched it before me though, so
that's true.
I'm
enjoying watching it with you.
I'm just now experiencing it.
Yeah. Well, I think we can call that a show.
Great.
So let's go ahead and raise the lights, lower the curtain, and say that for this week, the theater is closed.